So like, and for those who will not be able to make it today, we will be posting this online, and hopefully you will get to see this. Because I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have Sarah Spring. I don't think I know anyone who that young, who is that knowledgeable about documentary film making. And also because she is one of those rare birds, she's an actual producer of documentary films, which is a very necessary part of documentary filmmaking, and we tend to overlook it when we're actually talking about documentary films or trying to make them ourselves in class. So she actually chose to be a producer at the ripe old age. I will just let Asia in because I know how keen she is, so we'll just let her come in. Hello, Asia. Can you hear us? Yes, well, okay, I guess you'll pick it up. From Asia Duran, hi, yes, I can. Okay, so if you could, by the way, if you can put your cameras on, that would be really nice for us all, because the more the merrier, as they say, and it's always nice to see friendly faces. So I was saying Sarah is a rare breed. She's not only a producer of documentary films, which started, like I said, at the ripe old age of 25. She started with her longtime partner, Céline Murat, a co-op of documentaries called Loaded Pictures. And 5 years later, she and Céline started their own production company, which is pretty brave, called Parabola Films. And over about 10 years, they made 10 pretty remarkable films. And perhaps the most remarkable of all is the last film that Sarah produced, which we'll be showing throughout this talk, called No Ordinary Man. But first, what I just wanted to say is why I'm so thrilled to have Sarah. She's one of those rare breed of producers that has managed to not make money her central consideration. You know, producers are the people who have to think about money. They have to think about financing films. They have to deal with institutions. It's a very difficult job that's not made out for everyone. And Sarah has managed to do all that and still make the films she cares about and she loves. And you will see exactly what I mean, because before starting to talk to Sarah, by the way, you're welcome to ask questions at any time throughout this. I would like to start the ball rolling by showing the first 6 or so minutes of her last film called No Ordinary Man. And wait for it, this film has been listed by the New Yorker magazine as one of the best films of 2021. And at this very moment, it is being considered by for an Oscar nomination for this year's Oscars. So you couldn't be at the better place if you are interested in documentary filmmaking and what producing means to documentary filmmaking. So I'm going to share my screen and start showing the beginning of the film. Here we go. Whoop.
Well, before we turn to our next number, we've got a little bit of tattling to do, so to speak. Both George Mayer and his piano player here, Billy Tipton. These two boys had a couple of specialty acts that are really terrific, and I think we might get them to give us an idea of that tonight. So first of all, we're going to sneak right over here beside Billy Tipton. And Billy, what business was it that you did?
Well, it was more or less monkey business, you know.
Monkey business?
Yeah, monkey business, kind of silly business there.
Really?
Yeah, it was really silly.
Well, look, silly Billy, go on and do it.
Something in a little vein that suggests don't be that way.
I would love to know any reactions to receiving a call about a project about Billy Tipton.
I guess I'm a musician and I didn't know who he was and I was very surprised at myself. Also a little bit guilty. I was like, this is like a trans legend. Like how have I not done my homework?
I know about Billy Tipton because I listened to Bikini Kill. They shout out Billy Tipton in a long list of important people in like queer history in a song. He is kind of erased from history when he was this amazing musician. It's like I listened to his whole album on the way here and I was almost in tears. Yeah. Here we go. It's not too bad.
All right. Is there any? I couldn't find any footage of him.
There's pictures.
There's pictures. Yeah, I no footage. So you don't really.
He probably was not on testosterone.
Which I never
thought. I don't actually know
was a
that.
rat. I enjoy it.
I don't know.
I'm auditioning for the role of Billy. This is my audition for Billy Tipton.
Auditioning for Billy.
This is Billy.
And I'm here for the role of Billy. How would I summarize the story of Billy Tipton? He was a trans-masculine jazz musician. Pretty simple.
The first phrase that always comes to my mind is the gentleman's Joe. You know, just the consummate professional and the gentleman's gentleman.
The first time that I learned about Billy Tipton was probably 2003 or 2004. Just before I started my medical transition, I was doing a ton of research at that point. And so I wanted to learn about my ancestors essentially that came before me.
In a way, Billy has been with me in sort of the background before my transition, and thinking about him again from the place of being a trans man was very interesting for me because I think I had held him, in just a sort of general context of queerness prior to that.
Billy Tipton. There are many stories for Billy Tipton. I will give you one. Billy Tipton was assigned female at birth, Oklahoma City, grew up there, was white, loved jazz, was given piano lessons as a small person from a woman, knew the Teagardens, who were sort of a jazz family, a white jazz family.
Oklahoma was this musical crossroads. It's like from the New Orleans jazz world to Chicago. There were a lot of people who went through Oklahoma in the 19 teens and 20s and 30s.
The story goes that at this point in time, Billy Tipton starts wearing men's clothing because everybody's wearing men's clothing, and so just to sort of fit in with the band, that's the only reason. This is how the story is written. Then something happens where Billy Tipton decides to basically make a break and then present himself as male full-time.
I'm gonna walk in.
Yeah. Use the space however you want. If you want a chair, just let us know. We'll change things up. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. I saw your ad in the Oklahoma Herald. I can play.
You can play what?
Saxophone, piano. I saw your ad in the Oklahoma Herald. I can play.
You can play what?
Saxophone, piano.
All right. What band are you with?
I'm between bands right now, but I'm looking to expand, and I could read music.
You've been seeing the inside of the club.
Yeah, my mom works in one, and since I'm the only man around here, I'm helping her out.
My mom works in one, so since I'm the only man around, I'm helping out.
This is the 40s, it's the war, so there are a number of all-women big bands that are happening. If Billy Tipton had wanted to be a woman in a big band, this is the time to do it because it is possible. But Billy Tipton does not do that. Billy Tipton becomes what we would call a regional jazz musician, tours around in big bands and then in smaller combos. He's doing well for himself. He's a successful regional jazz musician. He was part of a particular musical ecosystem wherein we need musicians who played at Elks Lodges, and who played at Air Force bases, and who played at nightclubs for people who, after work on a Saturday night or a Friday night, want to go out dancing. And he was one of those many bands that did that. And he did that quite well.
Now, number 16 on our program tonight.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. And start the discussion there. So Sarah, like, wow, already we understand that there's quite a story here. How did this story come to you?
Yeah, well, Billy Tipton is someone who's known, he's known in different communities for whom he's very important. He's claimed by different communities. So the story originally came to me as a queer story, and someone whose gender is perhaps up for conversation, up for question. And then it became very clear that actually, no, this is a story about a trans masculine person. This is a story about a hero of the trans community. And so we really had to kind of rethink Billy Tipton's story in the context of how do we put this film together where we are honoring and respecting trans masculine voices in the telling of the story, in the control over how the story is put together, who is making it, who is the team. So it kind of evolved as our political thinking around the project and how to put it together evolved. So it went from one thing to what you see today, which is very much a celebration of trans masculinity, a celebration of trans voices, this particular moment in conversations around identity, around who controls history, who is represented. And also trans narratives are shift, as with every political discussion among groups that have been historically marginalized, the conversation is changing very quickly. So our hope is also that within a few years, all of this is going to be so obvious, it'll be outdated. So I think that's the other thing is, when you start working on a film like this, like now, some of these conversations are perhaps already, hopefully, really clear to a lot of people that might be stumbling across the film. But definitely for a lot of people in the cisgendered community, such as myself, there is a huge learning curve just in making the film, of course, but in a lot of people watch the film and are introduced to not just a terminology, but to voices and ways of thinking about history and thinking about the dangers of how history is misrepresented, the real harm in that. It's a long answer to your question, but I think that doing work like this is like a process of like shifting and changing and listening and growing that is baked into the act of creating something like this.
So you mean this story came to you just at a moment when we were learning enough about transgender people to be able, that's more or less impose that as a focus? You mean if it came to you like 5 or 10 years ago, it would have been a story about queer, about a queer person?
It came out of conversations around Billy's story as a queer story, and I think that there's a shift also in terms of like the ethics of documentary filmmaking, ethics of journalism. All these things are linked. Who has the right to tell what story? And so as as the idea of not about us, without us is taking root and taking hold in every cultural milieu, that was very much at the heart of how we like shifted in our thinking about it. So I think that now, I think now it would be kind of unheard of for like a cisgendered creating team to be developing and getting funding for a trans story. But at the time we started putting this together, the funders weren't even questioning that. So it was actually, as a I took this on as part of my responsibility to actually shift the team completely and to really think about how to make it ethically in terms of respecting not about us without us. But it was interesting because some of the conversations that I would have with funders, I was going to them and I was saying, no, we have to change how this is all put together. We have to change what we proposed to originally, because my understanding as I'm learning more about the story, I'm growing and changing and understanding it in different ways. It's a trans story, actually. And so therefore, we need the majority of the team to be coming from that perspective.
Right. Now that's a huge decision and imposes its own kind of ethics in a way. I think it's not every day you move over the person who brought the film to you is the person you shoved aside to find someone else. Is that it?
No, no, not at all. So the story originally came to us from a filmmaker in the UK, who's a queer filmmaker. And she'd been thinking about this very much in the context of questioning gender and examining Billy Tipton through different lenses. Perhaps there's a community that would consider him queer. He's very much claimed by the butch lesbian community. He's claimed by feminist communities. He's claimed by trans communities. So we developed the film from that questioning lens for a little while. And then just in terms of the way that international co-productions work or don't work, we were trying to co-produce with the UK, between Canada and the UK. Ultimately, we weren't able to raise the financing in the UK, and all the funding that we raised was in Canada. So the UK filmmaker had the choice of whether she was going to just go and make the film on her own without us, or actually just transfer the rights to Parabola to make the film. So she decided that she wanted to have Parabola make the film. And then so in this process of Parabola taking over this story and starting to put the team together from scratch, we were also growing and changing our understanding of what this story was and having lots of conversations with the trans community about how to make it. So it was something that shifted, and it was interesting because it's linked to the barriers of how we produce films on a very technical financial level, where you need a certain percent of international financing to legally co-produce with a different country. We've co-produced with different countries in Europe before. In this situation, there wasn't enough international interest, and we needed a minimum of 20%. This is like a very minimum in order to co-produce with a different country. So yeah, I mean, and this actually happens all the time in development, in the fiction scene as well. A film is developed in one team and then shifts to another country, and then someone else comes on. And over the course of the life of a film, sometimes it's gone through various producers. I've developed films that have gone on to be made by other production companies, other teams. So I think what, things shift and change. And the thing that was interesting is, just being in this process of learning, I think, throughout it. And that's sort of, it happens slowly and very organically. But it's definitely a completely different film than it originally was conceived.
Right. And we'll be delving into that. But before we go back to Billy, a little bit about producing, because that's partly what we want to talk about. So the reason you got someone from how usual is it for a Canadian producer, documentary producer, to get a proposal coming from another country?
It happens quite a lot. I mean, Parabola was producing a lot of films internationally. Like we were doing work. We did a film in Johannesburg. We did a film in Mendoza, Buenos Aires, Bogota. Like we've actually shot a lot in different parts of the world. We've pitched a lot internationally. So it's not uncommon to get proposals from different parts of the world. And then the question is, how do we put it together within our financing system? And a lot of our funding, most of our funding in Canada is public funding, which is linked to a certain number of people on the team who are Canadian, a certain amount of money spent within Canada. And so if you're going to collaborate with different countries, you have to comply with all kinds of like very, very specific rules about how to legally do it and maintain enough of a Canadian status that you get to keep your Canadian funding. So it's really, it's not uncommon. And, I saw a film at the RIDM last month that I had I spent like, I think 2 years, Selena and I spent, I think, 2 years developing this film with a filmmaker who's based in Brooklyn, but originally from the former Yugoslavia. And we spent a couple of years on this film. It was a experimental work called Aleph that was based on a work by Borges. And then she ended up, we couldn't finance it in Canada. It was too complicated to put together. So she put it together internationally. And so 5 or 6 years later, I went and saw the final film at the RIDM. And it was great. It was so amazing to see what she'd made. She made exactly what she had set out to do. It's an incredibly interesting experimental work by a very bold filmmaker who's extremely interesting. And so I think this happens all the time, actually, that things shift and change and move and switch teams and then become something else. And yeah, but I think that's the thing also, it's collaborating is at the heart of making films and figuring out who can you collaborate with creatively, who can you collaborate with financially, if you're looking for funding to make the film so everyone can, earn a living making the work and do it properly and pay people properly.
Right. Now, just to set the table about producing, how would you describe, what does a producer do? Like, what do they eat in the winter, as we say in French? What is your role? What is your role?
Well, I mean, producing it's about who you are, right? So the way that Selena and I produced was often, like almost always, someone would come to us with a very basic idea. Like, for example, a filmmaker would come and say, I have an idea, I want to do a film about this group of people that we did a film about this group of teenagers in a small town outside of Bogota who were training to be bullfighters in a little school for marginalized youth. And he knew he wanted to make a film that was going to talk about the colonial legacy in Colombia and how young people who have been marginalized, who are often indigenous, how they are struggling against that and how that's present in their everyday lives. And so he'd made a short, about this. So he already knew about his themes. He wasn't quite sure exactly what he wanted to make. So we're there helping filmmakers think through what it is they want to do. We help them think about, we apply for development money, which is kind of this incubator period where we're getting a little bit of money, maybe from SODEC, maybe from the National Film Board, little grants to pay the filmmaker while they write and think and maybe shoot a little bit internationally or wherever they are, if they're going to shoot in Montreal, put a little demo together and start to kind of create what we call the production package, which is some sort of little teaser, mood board, demo, visual work that shows, essentially, I think of it as like you're presenting your dreams, your best case scenario of what would you imagine? Like, it's really like an act of imagining. It's not what the film is. It's kind of what your dreams are in some sort of visual form for the film. We put together the writing, logline synopsis, treatment, character sketches, all of that. And then when we have these tools, so I do a lot of the writing. Not every filmmaker likes to write, and that's really common, actually. Some filmmakers like to write. A lot of filmmakers don't like to write. I like to write. So
Really? Oh.
I do a lot of the treatment writing. So I help filmmakers, like we think through and talk through what it is they want to say. And I try to help them put it together in a really clear way so we can apply to grants. So really that whole thing can take like a year and a half, let's say.
Well, at least.
And then start applying for funding. And that can take another year easily of just trying to put the financing together so that everyone can get paid properly and the filmmaker can make the film they want to make. And then you go into production. And that means that you've got all of your money, you signed all your contracts, you've got all your bank loans in place, like the whole machine is ready to go, you've hired your crew, and then you go and shoot the film. And that can take, 6 months or maybe longer. And then you head into post-production. And so you start editing, you've got your, all of your sound design team lined up, and you've got, all of your archives that you're getting and all of that stuff. And that's like another 6 months to a year. So the films that we do are long-term films. Not everybody does that. So a lot of people don't do that. And like the smarter ones don't do that because it's really exhausting.
And it doesn't make you that much money. I mean, the more.
Yeah. It's something where like, I think I started pretty young. And so and also like Montreal in 2000, like in the early 2000s, I moved to Montreal in 1998, like rent was, you know, super cheap and you could have a little loft and it didn't cost anything. And like the cost of living was really low and it remained really low in a certain neighborhood for quite a long time. So I think you can only do this stuff if you don't have a lot of overhead or maybe you have another source of income or, you know, but we were really stubborn as a production company about wanting to take the time to help filmmakers express what it is they were really trying to say. You know, we thought about Parabola Films as a little bit of an art gallery. We're kind of curating, we're helping people think it through, put it together. Not so much what we want to say, but trying to help people get to the heart of what it is that they are trying to say. And we want them to be, like a lot of people come to us with an idea and then we would really just massage it out and help them figure it out. And okay, maybe you wanted to, what's the team that can help you kind of realize this and put it together? Anyway, so you edit the film and then you release it and it's like festivals and distribution and all of that stuff. So that it's really like head to toe. It is raising the money, but what we would do is it was a very kind of like in-depth kind of incubator process. And that's why we didn't do, you know, that many films. We try to do one at a time.
And that's why everyone of a documentary filmmaker wants to find their Sarah Spring. And then it's a lot easier. So before we continue with Billy, let us go back to the wonderful film and see a little bit more. Okay, where do I go from here?
Billy on a vocal, it's the best things in life are free.
Everyone, the best things in life are free.
When we would talk about the old days and where he had been and how it's changed over the years, you know, going into a town, arriving early in the morning, setting up in the radio station, playing your music to promote the show that you were going to do that night, you know, trying to get as many people to come out as possible, play the show, go to the after hours club, play the real music with all of the other musicians that were in town doing the same thing, and then move on along to another town.
I like the Billy attitude.
Yeah.
That was really cool. Yeah.
It's hard to get a gig. I'm a musician, so I always go into like, oh, I need this gig, you know, like. So I relate to it.
When I was younger, I liked to perform for like family and stuff, but like as a kid, and then as I started my transition, I kind of didn't really see a path for an actor. Unfortunately, at the time, I really didn't see anyone in TV and film that was trans in acting, so I didn't really think it would be a possibility or something I could pursue.
Hello. I'm good.
Marquise, if you can tap into your 18-year-old self who's walking into his first job ever, kind of tap into some of that nervousness.
Okay. Yeah, this would be very early on for Billy, since he only has been walking in the streets since 19. So this would be very early on. Maybe he probably just got his first couple of checks from the other job that he was doing so he could buy male clothes so he could walk into this audition. Okay. Well, I saw your ad in the Oklahoma Herald. I can play.
You can play what?
Saxophone, piano.
What band are you with?
I'm in between bands. I'm looking to expand. And I read music too.
You even seen the inside of a club?
Well, my mom works at one. Since I'm the only man around, I'm helping her out.
you were a kid?
You got a Conway. If I can't make her sing, the show's free.
He makes 2 albums as an.
Okay. So before we get into the specifics of the film and the vision, with obviously there is quite a vision there, just tell us a little bit about, so how did it, was it your and Celine's idea that you had to change the orientation and find the right people, and you then went and found the 3 people we're seeing sitting there filming?
Yeah, so Aisling Chinny, Amos Mack, and Chase Joint are the 3 key creatives who are behind every decision in this film. They're an amazing, amazing team. Aisling is someone I've known for a long time. She's a very brilliant Montreal filmmaker. Chase Joint is based, I mean, he's a little bit based everywhere, but he's been based in Toronto. He's in the States right now. He's a very brilliant academic, visual, like interdisciplinary artist and filmmaker. And Amos Mack is based in LA. He is a writer, very much like a cultural leader, cultural thinker around transmasculinity. So the 3 of them put this together. And
did you first go and get each one of those and say, I think you should work on this film?
It kind of emerged out of conversations, I think, a lot of discussions. Aisling is really interesting because she has a mixture of fiction and documentary background. She also, so Aisling and Chase co-directed the film. Aisling and Amos co-wrote the film, and Aisling edited the film. So lots of different skills. Chase is an incredible interviewer. He knows, like, as a, you know, he's a very well-respected guy in the trans masculine community in Canada and in the States. So he did all the interviews in the film.
Right.
He had these relationships with everyone. He is known, every single person in the film, they all knew each other. These are people who are constantly involved in discussions around, you know, they're media makers, they are cultural conversationalists. They're, you know, Thomas Page McGee writes for the New Yorker, and Marquise Wilson is like all these people are very known. And so when Chase would have these conversations with the people on screen, you're kind of entering into a discussion that's been going on for many, many years within. So you have the sense of being kind of a privileged person to be in a room, because actually what you're seeing is a real discussion between people who are already having this conversation, not someone kind of coming in and asking for an explainer. Like you're getting the chance to enter into a space, an intimate space. And then Amos started a magazine called Original Plumbing, which for many people in the trans community was their first exposure to trans masculinity in a way that felt like something that they could connect to. It's cool, it's creative, it's artistic, it's out of San Francisco, you know, been around for a decade, much longer than, like, it was around for a decade, and then Amos has been continuing to do work and do writing. And so, yeah, I think that having this really well-respected group of filmmakers and collaborators together, it happened pretty organically. And I think also just they were the right people to tell the story. So that's, I think, also just kind of being open to figuring out who can tell the story the best, who can kind of come in and how can they fit together. And I think that's also part of producing too, is just being really open to that and trying to create a space where like really creative collaboration can happen. Amos just happens to be American. So I also had to, you know, another thing that producer does is having to go and talk to the Canadian institutions and say, you have underinvested in the trans masculine community of writers in Canada. And that's your fault. And for me to make this film properly, I need someone who isn't just a trans writer. I need a trans masculine writer. I need someone who has experience thinking about these conversations, who can bring all of that wealth of knowledge to the film. and that is this person. So I think that's another thing that, you know, as a producer, you have to push back sometimes against the institutions and say, well, you know, if this creative community doesn't exist, first of all, you have to create policies to foster this community. Clearly, you haven't been doing that. So you need to run programs, you need to invest, you need to, I mean, Telefilm, for example, in the last year has created strands. You know, they're thinking about racial equity, they're thinking about Indigenous filmmaking. The federal government gave $13 million to the Indigenous Screen Office recently. Like there's programs now to invest in communities that have been historically underrepresented and excluded from the filmmaking community. But a couple, like say 3 years ago, when I was running around having these conversations with the funders, a lot of them were, you know, they hadn't really been thinking about this necessarily. I was definitely not the first person to be raising these conversations, but definitely in the last year and a half, there's more openness and understanding among the institutions that if they don't make these changes now, like they're completely irrelevant, and they're also harming the careers of, you know, generations of filmmakers here. So, you know, I think there's there's like an interesting, you know, they get to figure out where to push, you know, and you're like, who's the right team? How do I push? So producers pushing all the time. You're trying to push, you're trying to change things, you're trying to create a protected and safe space for your key creative team to do the work.
So how difficult, I was amazed when you told me that you raised $700,000 to finance this film. How difficult was that in view of the subject? Or just how difficult was that? I mean, in the world we live in, the documentary world we live in. And well, I'll start with that, you know, that's.
I mean, honestly, I think once the film really started to make sense in terms of what it was trying to say, how it was going to say it, it's a great story. So, and it's a great team, and it's a very, very intelligent team. So, you know, we got our broadcasters, you know, TVO documentary channel, the Telefilm Theatrical Documentary Fund, the POV Fund through CMF, Canada Media Fund. There was the Rogers Cable Fund and SODEC. So pretty much every fund that you could get in Canada, we accessed.
So everyone understood this was a big film. This was not a little thing that.
I think so. I think that people understood, but also funders came in at different stages. And so as the film did shift, you know, there was conversations about, you know, this is going to be a little bit different than you thought, and it's going to be better. And so that was another thing, is having those discussions, for example, with our broadcaster or other partners. But people, like, they were excited about it. As the film changed and got better, the funders got excited about that. So I think that was, to their credit, something that, you know, I think once you tell them, you show them the way, I mean, they'll get on board. It's just a question of, you know, filmmakers and producers and creators always having to, you just have to keep pushing the envelope, because the changes are going to come from the ground up, you know.
Okay. By the way, you're welcome to ask questions at any time. I always have a million of them, but just raise your hand and the floor will be yours. So this is a producer question. How do you know that you need 700,000 in this case? Like, you make a budget, but how do you know, what does that budget rest upon?
Well, it wasn't 700,000 at the beginning. So essentially, you when you're putting the financing together a film, you know, you're trying to raise money, and at a certain point you need to say, okay, I've raised as much as I can right now, and we do have to shoot. So we're going to lock the budget, or essentially start production with what we have. But then you continue to fundraise, because ultimately you want to pay everyone really well. You want to make sure, if the filmmakers want to get this music or get that editor or get that, you know, you want to be able to mix the film, you have archives, like just have all the tools. So yeah, we continued to fundraise. The Rogers Cable Fund came in at the end, actually. So continue to apply for more and more funding for the film. But it started off lower than that, for sure. But you're always, you're kind of like fundraising to a point, and you're like, okay, let's just lock the budget, go to contract, get the money rolling, start making the film. But you continue to apply for, I mean, what we do is we continue to apply for grants and continue to fundraise right up until the end.
And the fact that you only had 9 days of shooting, which, you know, even in a much less ambitious film is quite low, is because you didn't have anything else to, it's not because you didn't have the money to shoot for more days, it was because you had nothing else to shoot. Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, essentially every shoot was almost like putting together a short film. So we decided to do a high production value shoot each time. Well, first of all, I should back up and say there's no video footage of Billy Tipton. But also we didn't want to, like earlier on in the project, we'd float around the idea of recreations, having someone perform as Billy, but it kind of would have played into the problematic nature of deciding how to represent him and how to show him. And so the team came up with the idea of having auditions. So having a breadth of different transmasculine actors portray Billy to also, you know, highlight the incredible talent out there, because these are all actors. But also to say, like, there's no one way to think about Billy in terms of what he represents to different people, but to let Billy represent himself. Like, we have the photos of him. He identifies as a trans guy. He's transmasculine. He lived his entire life as a man. He's a man. So to not have any kind of someone else like officially as the filmmaking team portraying him was another disliked political decision. So landing on doing the auditions. So we said, okay, we'll have auditions in New York, we'll have auditions in LA. And obviously we're gonna go to Spokane, where Billy died and where his son is, and you know, have a scene where we go and talk to his son. But I mean, the shoots in New York and LA, like you know, these were really like a short film. I've never had so much gear for a documentary film ever, because it's always just, you know, very light camera, a sound person, you know, just like really, really small teams. And here we had a very top level cinematographer, Lena Milhuya, who does a lot of fiction. We had 2 ARRI cameras. We had, you know, a huge lighting setup. We had monitors, we had everything. We rented out these big, beautiful spaces. And in every city, we're also hiring all of these emerging trans crew to come work on the film. So there was second cameras and data wranglers and like all these different crews. So we had like a full setup of a short fiction film. And then we would have these interviews, and you know, it was just very treating people with this enormous amount of like care, and making sure that we are getting, these people have been in, you know, various films over the years or interviews, but always in quite kind of low quality, filmed in a really kind of low quality way, low budget, because they didn't have the budget. You know, okay, we're gonna make kind of a historical document of these figures at this point in their career as well. So thinking about it as respecting the people who are on screen by showing them, lighting them beautifully, having an incredible setting, beautiful cameras, just showing them in such a gorgeous, respectful way. So, so we did, most of the people were around either like New York or vicinity, LA or vicinity. So some people we kind of flew in from San Francisco or from Boston, but yeah, so we did a day of auditions in New York, a day of auditions in LA, and then there was the interview days, and then we went to Spokane. So we had all of this footage, but then, you know, it was really in the edit that it all came together in terms of all the archives and how to creatively use the photographs and the audio. We had a bunch of audio from the Stanford University, who has a big Billy Tipton archive. So it was like all these different pieces and how to put them together.
Okay. Are there any questions before I show another little part of Billy? Okay, I'll share my screen. I'm just going to move forward here. We're going to first go to the media reactions.
To sensationalize their
might not ring a bell.
Tell your story.
Billy Tipton. The name might not ring a bell, but Billy's story is one of the most intriguing you'll ever hear. In the 1940s and 50s, Billy Tipton was a well-established jazz musician who played the American nightclub circuit. For a time, Billy Tipton even had a record deal, cutting 2 albums with his group, the Billy Tipton Trio. But it isn't Billy's musical talent that makes this story unique. Instead, it's the almost inconceivable secret Billy kept for more than 50 years that still has people shaking their heads in disbelief. Billy's ex-wives and children among them.
A jazzy gender bender who for nearly 60 years turned the entire world into a stage while composing for herself a brand new life as Mr. Billy Tipton.
He was the perfect husband every woman dreams of.
In all those years, you don't have sex, but at some point in the shower, getting up in the morning, in the kitchen, somewhere, you would see that person, some part of him naked.
No. Any indication or any faking of the shape of a penis on the part of your...
All right, except there...
Okay, now that's the media reaction at the time. Or when, yeah, at the time. And this is, let's move back here to what the people in the film are saying.
I just thought of it as like here we go again, like some other person who's managed to live their life and now they're being outed, and there's going to be a media circus about it, and then people will move on to the next thing.
I was still in high school, and I remember it happened, and it was all over the news, and I just remember thinking, huh, right? Like, it was a thing that you notice, but I didn't quite know what to think about it. There was something there that I was not at that point in time ready to think about, personally.
A woman trying to be a man. Well, of course he died. Of course. That was pretty much the coverage I read about. He was a woman, and he was trying to fool everybody, and he was successful, but he was finally found out. That was the story in the media in those days. Why? Because there was no such thing as a trans man. There was no word for him, because as soon as you said transsexual, that's impossible, because that's a man who becomes, in their words, a woman.
So it's quite interesting what you've done there. Very normally you'd have the media reaction, and you sort of flip that. You have first the people you're interviewing saying what they thought of Billy's story, and then you show the Oprahs and the this and the that and the that. Was that tell me a little about the vision of the film, or the purpose of the thinking of that went into the film.
I mean, the idea is that by the time you get to the tabloid story, you've learned about Billy, you've learned that he's a musician, you've learned that he's a father, you've learned certain things about him, and you understand that he's a trans man. And so when we get to the media, the audience, no matter what way they're entering into the story, they're going to be able to have this experience of how violent that conversation is, like how harmful that conversation is. And then we allow, we give space afterwards for the people in the film to deconstruct it and talk about it. So it was very intentional where to place that, because it's important that people watching it, no matter what their experience or relationship is with the trans community, that they understand that this is extremely dangerous. Like what was happening was dangerous.
In what way?
Well, I mean, a lot of there's a very high level of murder of trans people,
Right.
So and a lot of the violence against trans people is this, you're not real, you deceived, you're lying, So the narrative of deceit and the narrative of lying, that is, I mean, it dehumanizes someone because it's saying, you know, it's not a real thing. You're pretending, you're disguising. So the narrative in the media contributes to this idea that this is not a real group of people. These are not human beings who are who they say they are.
Yeah.
So when you don't believe someone when they tell you who they are, you're dehumanizing them. And it makes violence against them, you know,
right.
It perpetuates violence against the community.
And to that end, to the whole question of deceit, you have an absolutely extraordinary sequence, which I'm going to show now.
Francine, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. We actually have a question going a bit back. I have a question from Stefan. He mentioned when Sarah mentioned that she pitched her film idea to various people for financing, who was she referring to? The banks, the government institutions, SODEC, telefilm, finance companies? Can she break down the 700K and where it came from?
I knew someone would want to know about the money. Okay, so do you want to answer that now?
Yeah, so I have a relationship with all the broadcasters in Canada. I've worked with them many times. So when I have a film that I'm developing, I'll go to some of the broadcasters that I work with normally. So this film we pitched publicly at the Hot Docs Forum. That was one of the first places that we did a public pitch for the film. So there was, you know, these public forums are kind of these theatrical, I don't even know what to, it's very theatrical setup where the filmmaking team is sitting there at a table and you've got like hundreds of people sitting around this big space watching you. And then you've got all the people internationally that have money for documentary films sitting there, and you talk for 7 minutes, and then you show a 3-minute demo, and then you can talk for another 3 minutes or so. And then all of these funders around the world ask you questions about the film live in front of everybody in the film industry in the world, because they all come to Hot Docs. We've done this also at the IDFA Forum in Amsterdam, the big festival in the Netherlands. And so it's really like, it's a huge performance. It's very high pressure. It's very exhausting, but it gives you this amazing platform because then everybody knows about your project, and you have a chance to, you know, to raise some buzz about it. So we've done that. And then SODEC, you know, grant applications, you know, we got funding from SODEC for applying. As I mentioned, I think the Telefilm Theatrical Documentary Fund, you need you need a distributor to access that. So I have, you know, I'm just friends with the people at this Quebec distribution company called Les Films du Trois Mars. So early on, I begged them to submit with me, because they usually do only French films. So I begged them to submit with me to Telefilm, which they hadn't really done before. And you know, so it's like I'm always trying to find like, how can I apply to this thing with that thing, and this doesn't make sense, but maybe we can come together, we can make it happen. So this film was a lot of that. I was like, let's do this together. And then, you know, the film became a huge film, and then they end up having, you know, a documentary at TIFF, and they have a documentary that's like in the running for the Oscars, and that's like got this huge international team behind it, and there's screenings all over the place. So, you know, we were just friends trying to like maybe do what we could see what we could do for this film. And then, you know, it ended up being really great for them because they got to be part of this huge machine, which this like smaller Quebecois distribution company hadn't really done a lot of before. So, but yeah, I think when you're looking at funds, look at what the funds are and look at the guidelines, and you can like have a minute to think about it creatively and say, okay, well, technically I'm not eligible, but you know, what if I bring on this partner, or what if I think about this, or what if I actually contact them and say, you know what, I have this absolutely amazing project. You literally have nothing you've ever supported that celebrates this, you know, community or this filmmaking community. So you need me actually more than I need you. And I think that like sort of really understanding the value that you bring as a storyteller and explaining that to the funders, I think it's so important, because they don't know anything about filmmaking a lot of the time. and they don't know how much they need you, and you have an enormous amount of value. So that there was like a lot of that kind of discussion that we were able to have. And I think, you know, it takes, you just never know. You got to try.
Remember that they don't know how much they need you. That is a very good line. We're going to go back to Billy now. Here,
Such a con.
let's just,
Hello, Kitty.
Disclosure and outing as another form of harm, because people are no longer able to speak for themselves. That harm is often masked over by questions like, well, what about the wife? Or what about the kids?
Hello, Kitty. This is Diane. Have you had a chance to read the facts?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'd like to hear your response.
I can't tell you. You believe I'm a liar. There's nothing I can say.
No, there's everything you can say.
No, there's not, Diane. I told you the truth. You're saying I didn't, and there's nothing I can do.
Well, there is, Kitty. If
I didn't know. That's it, period. You say don't argue with you, don't go away from the facts. The facts are, I didn't know. Young Billy didn't know. How do we react? It blew us away. Well, that's the fact. Now, you don't believe it, so what can I tell you?
Kitty,
you're going to write a book and make me a liar. Then do it.
I tell you, Kitty, I have, on policy, believed you from the beginning. But
never mind policy.
You're
going to destroy my life, so that's fine.
Listen, I want to know the truth.
The truth is I didn't know. Okay, I told you I didn't
Kitty,
know.
you told me that you did not know.
I didn't.
At the time that you notified the funeral home, Don Ball, you called him on the night that Billy died and asked for his body to be removed from the funeral home.
No, I just asked if they could have, if he'd take Billy's body.
And it was,
I don't know, it's so confusing, that whole thing.
It was at that time, however, that you told Don Ball, and there are a couple of people who know this, that Billy was a woman. And that
No, I didn't. I didn't tell Don. He told me. Now, I don't know where you're getting this, but you're going to believe everybody else. Fine. Young Billy told you that he saw my reaction that I didn't know. I searched you out because I knew that you were supposed to be a person of character. Whatever your reason is, Diane, I can't stop you. You got the power, and you know it. Now, you can create me any way you want to. I can't stop you. How sad for me. How sad for my husband. How sad that the world is going to know me through your eyes and not the truth.
okay, like every good story has tension, and boy, is that a good illustration. Also, the main, the main, shall we say, nerve here about, is this about lying or deceiving people or not? So where did you get that stuff? I put this in context here. It's absolutely wonderful.
So a woman named Diane Middlebrook, who she was a professor at Stanford University and a biographer. She would do biographies of famous figures in history. So Diane Middlebrook wrote a biography of Billy Tipton. She was actually approached by Billy's wife Kitty, who he raised 3 sons with. So she approached Diane to write the biography, and Kitty was hoping that this would lead to movie deals, and just looking for some way to support herself and her family. And Diane Middlebrook spent years interviewing everybody in Billy's life and his family. Really, like, Kitty and Billy Jr. learned a lot that they didn't know about the family. There was an enormous amount of very detailed research, and Diane Middlebrook wrote a book called Suits Me, The Double Life of Billy Tipton. And the book is, you know, very problematic because even after speaking to all of these people in Billy's life and understanding that Billy lived his entire life as a man, and actually having conversations with very high, you know, very prominent intellectuals in the trans masculine community, it was very clear who Billy was and who Billy was presenting himself as to the world. And Diane Middlebrook decided to write a book that was based on the premise that Billy was lying, that Billy was a woman who dressed up like a man to be successful as a jazz musician. And that deceit was at the heart of Billy's life, and that, you know, he chose to live as a man literally till the day he died. But he was a woman.
And that his wife was in on this?
And that his wife knew, and, you know, it was very, like, for trans people, and, you know, they talk about this in the film, it was like a very violent experience to read that book. But anyway, so Diane's research, when she passed away, it was all donated to Stanford University. So there's a Billy Tipton archive at Stanford. And so Aisling and Amos, the two writers, they spent time going through all these tapes and, you know, brought home all of these recordings. And we didn't use a ton of the audio recordings. We used a few because we really wanted this to be a conversation among the people that we've chosen to be in the film, and not so much an investigation into the past and trying to uncover some truth, because the film starts with the premise that Billy is who he said he was. And so the film is not an investigation into who Billy is. It's a conversation about what Billy represents and his importance. So the tape that you're hearing is a very harmful conversation between Diane Middlebrook, the biographer, and Kitty, who Billy was with for many years, who raised his family with. And so Diane is trying to get at, did Kitty know? Who knew? And just really focused on this deception narrative. Yeah, really, obviously very harmful, very upsetting. And, you know, just the wrong focus to look at, you know, the wrong lens for Billy's story. But again, like the filmmaking team is always, you know, they're finding ways to introduce elements at a point in which the audience is able to understand the harm of it or the significance of it. So it's like you're being taken along this journey. And when this is introduced, you've learned so much already that you're able to say, okay, I can identify what's wrong here. It stands out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Asia, you have a question.
Hi. So I just had a question about about your role as like the producer, since you're like very involved in like the whole filmmaking process from beginning to end. Were you like a part of like the editing team? Because like that one sequence, starting with the person saying like the violence was masked with like innocent questions about, oh, what about the wife, what about the children, and then going into that conversation was just so like power, like that combination of like this is the kind of language that they use, and you move into the interview and like she's literally, it's like, no, I'm not coming from a bad place, I just wanted to know like who knew. It's like, no. So like were you a part of that like as a producer, do you get to be in that room like making those decisions about where clips go?
So the editor was Aisling Chinny, and so she was physically sitting there editing the film for 10 months.
10 months.
10 months.
Notice that.
So I would come in for certain moments and, you know, watch something and have conversations about it. But this is the editor. Like, this is the genius of editing. You know, and Aisling was having a ton of conversations with Chase, her co-director, but Aisling was physically sitting there, piecing, like intricately weaving these juxtapositions together. So Aisling and Chase really laid out how they wanted the film to be, and, you know, which parts would go where and what makes sense, and which points, like there's many different points that they knew they wanted to have in the film. And so what order those points appear in and how they come together and what the juxtapositions are. But the actual editing, this is like when you have a really good editor, like Aisling, that's really like the art form of it. And so Riley Sorton, the academic who speaks right before that clip, is just, you know, everything that they say is just boom, bang on. Like you could just listen to Riley speak for 3 hours and want more. Like a very, very, very brilliant person. And just so many just powerful one-liners that exactly, like if you want, when, you know, during the edit, it's like, okay, we need someone to say this succinctly. Okay, go back to the Riley interview. Riley is going to say it, you know? So I think just really also getting to know the footage really well. We had everything transcribed. So also just being able to look through it and think about it. So not like a full paper edit. It's not like it was put together on paper, but you know, just being able to refer back and say, oh yeah, that's where they said that.
Thank you for that question, Asia. In fact, I have a little excerpt chosen to show for the beauty of the editing. The editing here, there you could never have enough time in edit, and in this case, it was crucial, as Sarah pointed out, 10 months. So here's to the power of editing.
Diane Middle.
No, wait a minute. I mean, there's lots to the. Okay, we'll start it here. Let's see.
Merry Christmas, Grandma. This is coming to you from the living room of your former home in Spokane, Washington. It's a mighty gloomy night out tonight. We've had some snow, and it's kind of foggy out there, and it's probably around 32 degrees, which isn't too bad for this time of year. We've been very lucky with the weather, and we had some snow and some ice and some stuff, but it's all fairly mild now. In fact, it's good pneumonia weather, if that's any consolation to anybody. The family seems to be okay. Billy's had a few things happen to him, and Santa Claus is going to be here pretty soon if they're good boys. Excuse me, I still got my cough, as you can notice, and some of these days I'm going to give up these darn cigarettes. So have a very Merry Christmas, and hoist one for me. I'm not drinking this year. Okay, who wants to talk next? Do you want to talk to your grandmother? Okay.
And now presenting the star of the Tipton family, little Billy Tipton. Yes?
You lived with your dad?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and Dad passed on last month?
Yes, he did.
Now, you were with him the day that he died. Could you tell me what happened?
Well, the morning he passed away, he'd been ill for about a little over a month. It was January 21st, 1989. I had woken up kind of early, I don't know, maybe around 8 or 9. I had taken care of him during this whole time, and we cooperated with each other as much as we could. The morning in particular, it was quite early, around 9, and he asked to go sit in the living room of our home. And so I was helping him from one room to another at that point in time because he has grown so weak at this time. And I got him into the living room, sat him down, turned on the TV. I said, I'll cook you some breakfast. Sit there, just relax. He had several colds on and off, pneumonia, bleeding ulcers. I went back and checked on him, and he goes, well, I need to go to the bathroom and stuff. So I helped him. And at that point, I was literally picking him up, carrying him from room to room. He had lost so much weight. He goes, no, I think I want to go back to bed. I was really upset with him because, for the main fact, I'd asked him for weeks to go see a physician, a doctor, some kind of medical help. And he simply refused everyone. I went into the kitchen and made a phone call because I know he wanted me to hang up if he heard it, but I started making a phone call and I looked all in. He kind of slouched over. And so I hung up the phone. I ran over to him. I said, "Are you okay?" He just kind of gave me a look that I'd never experienced before and collapsed in my arms.
He gave this horrendous sigh and literally vomited blood all over me. And basically just died right in my arms.
He let out a great sigh and passed away.
In your arms?
Yes.
Okay. Can I get a producer to just bring the acknowledge? That's all right, Joseph.
Wow. So, I mean, just, I mean, you know, it always packs a punch to be able to show someone in two different time zones, you know. But in this case, the way it's done, you know, there's 3 levels: the sound, the before, the now, the young guy, the old guy. It's extraordinarily well done, extraordinarily well done. And how difficult was it to get Billy Tipton on board, or was it?
It wasn't difficult. I mean, Billy Jr.
I mean,
he had done so much media. He was just so accustomed to being interviewed in the media. So he had all these sort of kind of standardized sorts of responses. But for him, when he realized that, you know, what Chase wanted to talk to him about was about someone that is a hero and not someone that was a freak. And then everything just kind of shifted. So he was fine to talk to us because he was just like, he was so accustomed to insane amount of media attention. They did the whole circuit when his dad died. And there's been various, you know, little stories over the years, but to get a real conversation out of him, that's where you see Chase's skill as an interviewer. That was really because it was coming from a genuine place where he's saying, your dad is important to me. He's important to my community. So that is, you know, as a documentary filmmaker, when we talk about directing skill, you know, it's not just understanding, you know, oh, it's a good story, and oh, I'm going to hire this cinematographer, and oh, I'm going to go and film here, and da, 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 da. It's really being a good director is understanding how to establish an honest, creative exchange with the people who are in the film in which they feel respected, they feel safe. You know, you're creating where they want to be generous because you're asking something really important from them, which is to share, you know, their story. And a really good director understands how to create that in a genuine way. And that's, you know, Chase did that. And that's why you get that kind of interview. So sometimes you'll watch a film and you'll be like, you know, I didn't really connect with the people on screen. And a lot of the time it comes down to the director not being able to create that space. And I think it's really interesting. The more you get into filmmaking, the more you understand what it is that you're seeing when you don't connect with the film. What is it that you're not connecting with? Yeah. Is it the editing? Is it the camera work? Is it the director and the way that, and the space that they're creating? And a lot of the time, I think in documentary, it does come down to that.
Are there questions? More questions? Please do not be shy. Because I always have more. There's another. For me, I'm going to show what I think is more or less the moral of the story. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. This is another later sequence in the film.
Imagine
And through this change, it will still be slow and gradual, and we will always recognize each other.
When we adopted 3 children, he was a doting, loving, caring, ordinary father. Father. He was their father. He gave me a warmth and a love and support that every woman dreams of. And this is what I got.
At first, it was a great shock. I could not believe that this had happened. But it was only moments later that I told myself, I said, hey, I guess nothing's changed. No matter what he was, I loved him just the way he was.
As quickly as we can get to a point where being human is the fundamental way in which we understand trans bodies, like the better. I think we have to recognize that the culture has not totally figured out how to be ready for us yet. So those of us who in this generation, we are in a much different place than Billy Tipton. We're public in a way that so many trans people before us haven't been able to be, or have been able to be but have died for being. And this is a really unique period of time, and it's still not a time where we get to have like the lives that we should get to have. And certainly those of us who are not white and who are not passing, and all of these other privileges that I personally have, like there's so much we aren't able to experience in the full human spectrum. The way to change that is to shine a light back on cis people, which is what my interest always is. Why are you asking these questions? Why are you so invested in this story? And is there a way we can create a partnership where we can talk about gender together rather than, we're the metaphor and you're the status quo?
Creating your own identity just for yourself, to me, that's just uniquely what transness is. And it looks different for every single person. There's no cookie cutter, one size fits all to say that this is what is trans. I know it's probably frustrating to folks in community too who want to pinpoint it and identify, but I just don't believe that is possible. I don't think that's ever going to be possible to do. It's part of the problem in the first place. Human experience is way more limitless than that. It's impossible to be 100% anything.
It's impossible to be 100%. I love that line. Anything. So is that the moral of the story? There's so many, but is that sort of what people hope, the filmmakers hope people will take away?
It seems insane to have a message where you're telling people to think about people as human beings. Like, it seems crazy. Yeah. Like I'm hesitant to say that that's the moral of the story because it seems so completely insane, but actually there's just an enormous there's an enormous amount of racism, of transphobia, of homophobia, of white supremacy, of all of these things are baked into our society. So yeah, we do need to actually have work that says these people are human beings still. Yeah.
Sorry, Francine, I got another question from—
Yes, I was just going to say.
I got another question from Stefan. He wrote, can the technology, the camera, lighting become an intimidating obstacle that hinders that process? I think maybe he was referring to what you were saying before.
Yeah. So I think, documentary teams often work really lightly in order to not intimidate the process or hinder the intimacy. But in this situation, we had the person who was doing the interviewing people that he was very intimate with already, and who he had spent years establishing trust and, collaborating with in different ways. So, and also everyone on camera is very accustomed to being on camera, other than Billy Jr., right? But, Marquise and Thomas Page McGee and, Stefan Pennington and Susan Stryker, these are superstars of trans academia and media makers and writers and journalists. So very, very, very comfortable with being on camera, and trusting of the person who's asking the questions and the team that put the film together. So as a director, absolutely, you need to think about how to create that space, right? And so when you're going into a place where people are vulnerable or don't have any reason to trust you, every time you put up that camera, you're creating an imbalance, right? You're creating an inequity the second you point the camera at somebody. So you have to be aware of that as a filmmaker all the time, and be thinking about how do I work with that, or acknowledge that, or try to redistribute the power in this dynamic. So I think you really have to think about who it is that you're filming. What is the context? Is this a brand new conversation, or are you stepping in? Are you filming a conversation that has been in progress for a really long time? So I think these are all these things that you have to think about. These are like directorial decisions in order for people to want to be generous and to feel comfortable and to give you the kind of goal that you want when you're making a film.
Yeah. I'm going to show the closing minutes of the film, which really speaks to what Sarah's talking about, the kind of spirit this film was made, and the importance of that. And then maybe we could talk a little bit about the documentary organization of Canada.
If you say that, it's got its little snow tires on it, it's running real good. Of course, the old Barracuda is forever amber, I guess. She just keeps going. And Kiki's fine, the dogs are fine. And everything seems to be going pretty well in the house. We've been very, very lucky. God's been awful good to us. So I'll sign off for right now, and Mommy will have some of the boys talk to you. But let me say we love you. I sure wish you were here with us. Okay, light up the cigarettes. Everybody have a go at it again.
Are we gonna sing together? Are you gonna sing together?
Oh boy, what a great! So where can we see the film apart from perhaps at the Oscars? Who knows?
So the film it came out in theaters during the pandemic, so it came out virtually, and it's still available online. So I think that if you just go to any streaming site, you'll be able to rent it. Like Apple and Google Play and all these things, you can rent it anywhere. And yeah, it had a theatrical release in Canada, it had a theatrical release in the US. It's getting various distribution internationally, and yeah, it's one of the films that is eligible to qualify for an Oscar. So right now, the Academy is voting on its shortlist, and it's one of the films that has the potential to get on that shortlist, it's really amazing for a Canadian documentary. obviously there's lots of different politics of how films get selected. So, I mean, the chances are slim, but it's nice to just be watched by a lot of people, which is really the goal of a film like this, is you just really want a lot of people to see it. And that was always our goal. You know, when you're starting to make a film, who do you want to see the film? You know, are you going to try and go with a specific audience, and how you make it? We wanted this to go broad, and we wanted people to be able to watch it and get different things out of it depending on what level of relationship they had with the subject matter. So people that are intimately part of this community are going to experience it in one way. People that are coming at it from with less knowledge of the subject matter are going to come at it another way, but everyone can get something out of the film.
Absolutely. Questions?
I have a question. So how do you market a film like this? And as a producer, how much are you involved in the marketing of the film?
Personally, I hate dealing with distribution, so I tend to try and find distribution partners. Some producers are really good at distribution and they love marketing, and that's just the part that I like the least, actually. So I try to find great partners. So usually, you know, there's certain tools, marketing tools. So you make a trailer, you make a poster. So these are the kinds of things where I was involved in, like the very basic stuff. But after that, we find distributors. And so we had a Quebec distributor named Film du Franc-Mars, and then we partnered with an English-Canadian distributor to take the film out to English Canada called Level Films. We found an international sales agent because the film had its world premiere at the Toronto Film Festival in 2020. So it was TIFF's first pandemic year. That was the year we got into TIFF. So yeah, it had, you know, this film played, you know, I don't even know how many film festivals around the world, but, you know, many festivals, because you start at TIFF and then you play, you know, 20 Canadian film festivals, and then you got invitations from all over the world, and they played virtually for a year and a half. And it's just starting to have some in-person screenings. But yeah, so a film that kind of has that TIFF like seal of approval tends to just get invited everywhere and gets a huge spotlight on it. So a lot of the work is kind of done for you in a way. And then you try and find a great team to market it and publicize it and stuff. But a lot of, you know, there's just been a lot of collaborations with like GLAD, for example, in LA, which works around, you know, the queer communities in Hollywood, trans representation in Hollywood. So they've been a big partner in like helping the film get out there and linking it to messaging. That's political messaging that is important for the film. So that's something that we've been trying to do a lot of, is who are the right partners to amplify the film's message and, you know, make sure it gets out to the broadest possible audience. But I actually, some producers love it. I don't like it. So I try to find other people to do it.
I have another question in the chat from Stefan. Sorry to interject, but he said, as a producer, are you actively involved in lobbying the Academy to watch the film for their consideration?
It's a good question. So I had a like 2-hour-long call right at the beginning of all this Academy business, like when it was clear that we were eligible, and it was clear that we were potentially it wasn't totally impossible that we might make the short list. We had a big call with our American distributor, a company called the Oscilloscope. That was, you know, my only knowledge of it was started by one of the Beastie Boys way back in the day. And but they do a lot of indie films, and you know, they're really great. So they explain the entire Academy, how it works, A to Z, which I didn't really know a lot about. But you can't actively lobby; it's illegal. You can say for your consideration, and you try to get people to watch it, because there's I think about like 500 or 600 members of the Academy who are documentary people. I think the Academy has maybe 6,000 members around the world. About 500 vote in the documentary section. So you're just trying to make sure that those people watch the film, because most of them aren't going to watch the film. There's you know 120 or so films that they can watch. They're going to watch some. They're going to watch the ones that they know about, the ones that are made by their friends, the ones they've heard of. So it's all kind of an awareness campaign. If you just people to hear about it, then maybe they'll watch it. And if they watch it, you have faith in your film that they're going to like it. But there's also a lot of older Academy members who are going to, like not either they're like going to watch it on DVD somewhere, like they're not participating in the social media discussion around the film. And then there's younger Academy members who are part of these conversations, who are bringing into it like all of their, like political ambitions about what they want, like an Academy Awarding documentary to be like. So yeah, it's like a really interesting and complicated terrain, how the Academy works. Yeah, you cannot lobby.
And Sarah is the only probably member of the team right now who isn't in Hollywood. Waiting.
I know everyone is in New York tonight for like
New
a
York
big Academy screening, actually.
Yeah.
Which is great. Like I'm excited for them.
When are we going to know? When are we going to know?
Well, I think the shortlist comes out, I think they're voting December 5th to 10th. Like it's this week that the voting takes place. And then at some point after that, the shortlist will come out. But it's kind of interesting. This is like maybe not interesting, but I found it interesting that the way that the Academy voting works is that they're not just tallying the number of votes per film. They're tallying the number of they're tallying the total of #1 votes per film.
Oh.
And so actually, when you watch an American film and there's like 10 executive producers.
Yes.
So one of the strategies for American docs is they'll have executive producers who are members of the Academy who know to vote in a #1 spot for the film. So films can be positioned from the very beginning as like, how do we get into the Oscar race? And I found that fascinating because like we don't know anything about that. Like we have no idea. Like in Canada, we're just like, there's like I think 8 voting Academy members in documentary in Canada. So yeah, it's very, there's a lot of kind of like, oh, and like this person edited that film and they're gonna vote it. So it's not just like counting votes per film.
No.
It's yeah, it's like an interesting, strange process, but I think yeah, it's like not super transparent.
But isn't that kind of like a conflict of interest if you're working on a film and then voting on if the film gets on the short list?
Totally.
You shouldn't get to the driver. You're not going to watch all the films. But I mean, like, obviously this is about politics, like so many other things. So, well, we're certainly hoping it'll get on the short list. But even if it doesn't, it's a huge success. I mean, it's a huge, even without it being a commercial success, it's a huge exploit, and bravo for that. Now you we have a few minutes left. You walked away from all that you turned your back on producing great films, possibly Oscar-winning films, to become the new executive director of the Documentary Organization of Canada. Yeah. So first of all, just tell us in 2 words, what is the Documentary Organization and why did you decide to do that?
So the Documentary Organization of Canada is an advocacy group to represent documentary filmmakers that was started by filmmakers in 1983. So it's been around for almost 40 years. Most people involved in documentary in the country are members. There's, about 1,100 members around the country. There's 6 chapters, so 1 in every region. There's 1 in Quebec. I was involved in the Quebec chapter for years. Francine, you were in Doc Quebec, yeah. So it's like a lot of people I know in documentary were involved in Doc Quebec, like in Montreal, we're involved in Doc Quebec at one time or another. So Doc is like, our mandate is to advocate for, an equitable, sustainable, functional ecosystem for documentary filmmakers in Canada. So I've been involved with Doc for years, and I knew about Doc, but I was always a producer. And then, they called me because they needed an executive director, and I was I was like, okay, I'm open to thinking about it. And the more I thought about it, I was like, actually, a lot of what I do is advocating for my filmmakers. And, you know, I always tended to take the hard road because I was trying to see how to make the system fit to my filmmakers' needs, always. And, you know, instead of just being, you know, a producer that was like going to get 8 hours of sleep at night and get well paid and just think about like, how do I make my filmmakers fit into the system, right? This is like the smart way to do it. This is the like, you're going to get lots of sleep and you're going to make more money if you're just like, I know how the system works and how do I just kind of work within the system? This is like the way that you're going to make a living as a documentary producer. But I was always trying to go the other way. And so then the more I thought about it, I was like, well, actually it makes sense because I'm naturally advocating for my community anyways. And I think the Documentary Organization of Canada, they hadn't really ever had an independent documentary producer who'd been in the trenches forever and knew everybody. They never really had that person running the organization. So I thought that I could really do a lot. And so I took that job in January. It's been, you know, almost a year. And at the same time, I really believe a lot in, you know, the younger generation of creators and producers and filmmakers. So I'd been mentoring. I mean, I guess it's more of an apprenticeship with an emerging film like producer in Montreal. So for about 2 years, I'd been investing in an emerging producer who I wanted to just tell her everything I knew, because I knew I wasn't going to be wanting to produce films forever. So I decided to just give her the company. And so she is developing her own films, and I've been just guiding her through the process and telling her everything I know, giving her all my contacts. And so she's kind of like 3 years ahead of where she should be, because she's getting this sort of, you know, all the secrets and all the contacts and how it all works for me. So that was just kind of worked out well. So she's taking over running the company and I'm at Doc. And I really like understanding how the system, like all these things that you experience on the ground that don't work and don't make sense. And then I get to go and tell people that doesn't work for filmmakers and this is not equitable and that actually isn't sustainable. And, you know, all of these policies are problematic. And like all of these things, I get to have these conversations, but be in the room with people where like these can have an impact. So there's certain things that I'm able to do now that I've been trying to do in different ways as a producer for a long time. So it's great. Like I really enjoy being at Doc right now. It's a really interesting time. Doc is growing quite a bit. So it's always been around kind of 750 members, and now we're over 1,000. And the chapters are growing, and people are doing great work. There's important discussions happening, and we can really participate in that. So, I mean, I think people should join Doc. I think it's a good place for filmmakers to get to know other filmmakers and to make sure their voices are heard, and, you know, to contact Doc with problems they're facing, because probably other people are facing them too, and then we can come at them as a collective. So, you know, I think there's a lot of potential for Doc to do a lot for filmmakers.
What would you, how important would you say for an aspiring young documentary filmmaker would it be to know about the system, how it works? I mean, that's one thing that sort of bowled me over when I started in documentary rather late than anyways, rather on the late side of, there's so much to know and it changes all the time. So how important is it to understand that system?
That's fundamental. I think you need to know, and even if you don't want to be a producer, if you want to be a director or an editor or a camera operator, it's good to know how the system works, because then you can advocate for yourself. You know, you can advocate for your community, and you can understand how things work, and, you know, you can understand the contracts that are given to you. So, and the time frames, you know, why something is going to take that long, or why this is going to be paid at that level. That if you're offered something that actually doesn't make sense with what you understand to be true, like it's really important to be able to protect yourself. So You have to know how it all works. There's a lot of business affairs training programs right now that you can access, and I think they're really worth taking these courses or boot camps or whatever. It's good to know how it all works. I used to get invited to speak to Concordia's production class every year, and I would do kind of an A to Z. And I think these types of A to Z sessions are really helpful. You know, what is development? How do you raise funding? How does it all fit together? Who are the players? How does it work? I think it's good to know all this stuff. I think it's really, it empowers you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Questions? Now's your time.
Two things. Well, I have my original question and then something you just said now. You said that there's a lot of like business affairs workshops. Like, do you have any, can you name any right now that are available?
Yeah, so the Canadian Independent Screen Fund is just launching a bunch of workshops. Let's see if I can find them. I can put them in the chat. There's like a business affairs workshops. The Canadian Media Producers Association has a lot too. I am launching some business affairs sessions that are specifically for Black, Indigenous, and people of color creators. It's funded by Ontario Create, so the pilot is just for Ontario producers, but I'm looking for funding to expand this nationally. So there's plenty of different ways to enter into it, and maybe what I'll do is, Francine, I'll send you some links that you can send to the students. Because I think that the industry is understanding or listening finally about how if the next generation of creators and filmmakers are going to be able to operate successfully within the mainstream industry, they're going to need these tools, which have been kind of closely guarded, I think, for many years by my generation and up. So just to kind of share information, break down the sort of tricks of the trade, there's a lot of emphasis on that right now. So I'll send you, but yeah, check out the Canadian Independent Screen Fund, the CISF, because they're just launching a series of boot camps right now. And the Black Screen Office is doing a lot of work in that field as well. But yeah, the CMPA is doing a lot. And then there's a series of workshops called One Stop, which are put together by CBC and CAVCO, I believe. But yeah, I think if you just Google business affairs workshop or boot camp or any of those things, you'll be able to find a bunch. But I'll send some links through.
That's great.
Okay, thank you. And so then my original question was like, can you talk a bit more about, like, as a producer, at what time in like the development phase do you usually get to see like the project? Because I'm just thinking for like an aspiring filmmaker, like at what point in their project do they start meeting with with producers? Because I'm imagining they have to come with something that's already like a bit on its way, but then there's also a lot of work that still has to be done. So like at what point do they start talking with a producer?
I mean, sometimes really early. Like I've had filmmakers come to me with an idea that was really just like, I want to make a film about, my community of Syrians in the Quebec diaspora. Like that. And then we start working together and thinking through, okay, well, that's an idea, but it's not a story. And who would be in the film? And how do you want to narrate it? And blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, I think that it's really about, why do you want to tell the story? Why are you the right person to tell it? Who do you want to have in the story? What do you want to have happen in the story? Like some of these basic ideas, if you think about that and you can answer those questions, go see a producer. But I mean, look at their work. Like, I think it's really important to go to the producer's website and look at the kind of films that they do and find a producer that is going to fit with you creatively. Do they produce films that aesthetically respond to the kind of work that you want to make? Are you wanting to make experimental films, and then don't go pitch someone who only does TV documentaries for TV5? If you want to make hardcore political work, go and find a producer that is making that type of work. If you want to make really like essay films that are very much, you know, cinema verite, cinema direct, following people long periods, like find the producers that are doing the kind of work that can understand not just how to raise money for the film, but how to give you the support that you need to make that film. They have to understand what it is that you're talking about. So I think that as a filmmaker, you should do your research about what producers are out there. The RIDM has, like the Montreal Documentary Festival, the RIDM has a really great program called First Pitch, Première Pitch, and it's for directors looking for producers. So you should check it out for next year. So you submit with a project and then you go and you pitch, and then there's all these veteran producers there. And you know, I've picked up films there before. A lot of people pick up films there. It's a great place to find producer. It's, you know, all Quebec, right? So the programs like that are great. But yeah, I think again, it comes down to just like understanding if you have like a really good sense of you know, why it's important to you, and you know, why you want to tell it, and what do you want to say, then exactly what happens in the film isn't as important. You'll figure it out, you know. But a lot of producers are going to be able to tell just from how you talk about those elements if you really like have something there. And then of course your relationship to the subjects, your access, all of that stuff. Like CBC, for example, we do these sessions at DOC. So we have CBC come every 6 months. We just started this in the last year. So every 6 months, CBC comes, all their top executives, they meet with everyone at DOC. So we have these virtual sessions and I moderate a Q&A with the top documentary executives of CBC, and every DOC member can come and they can ask questions, and they just ask everything, and CBC has to answer everybody's questions. And so they were saying, you know, we are really going to look at access right now. So if two people come to us with a documentary idea, we're going to look at what's that person's relationship to the story. Are they going to be able to just like, are they close to the subject? Do they have an access that nobody has? So, you know, I think thinking about that too, if you're not like, oh, I want to make a film about this community in this other space, that you have to start from zero and establishing a relationship with. If you already have a connection, I think it'll make it that much easier to find a producer early on too. Because they know that the broadcasters are going to want to see that.
Yeah. That's really important advice. It's all important advice, but what Sarah was saying about finding the right fit, there's a lot of producers out there, and they're not all the same. You know, a lot of the bigger ones do all kinds of things in which probably you don't fit. I mean, you have to find that out before you knock on the door. I really think that's really good advice. Are there any other questions?
What tips can you give for writing pitches to get grants?
To get grants?
Yeah.
I think that when you apply for a grant, if you're not sure what you want to say, it comes through to the jury that's reading it. If you don't really understand why you want to tell the story, who you want to have in the story, even if you don't know exactly who's going to be, what's the type of person you want in the story, and what you would like to see happen, and why you want to make it, and you know, if you can't really answer these fundamental questions, like that's grant writing. There's no kind of secret to it. I think it's really about if you have a clear sense of what you want to do, then that will shine through whether or not you're a fabulous writer or you're someone who's not very comfortable with writing. And you know, anytime I've been on a jury or gotten feedback from a jury, when I was working on a project and we got a no from a jury, and you look at those jury notes, they often are pointing out things that you're like, yeah, it's true, like that wasn't really clear. You know, you have this idea, but how do you want it to appear on screen? A lot of people aren't able to really describe that or talk about that. And they're more talking about their film as an idea rather than a story. You know, what happens in the film? Not just it's a film about this concept. Like you really want to think through. You don't know exactly because it's a documentary, but in your ideal world, what would you like to see happen? Because the jury is often investing in your ability to imagine your film, not so much that you know what's going to happen. And what they like is your imagination. So I think it's just kind of like trying to get as clear as you can about what it is that you want to say. And then also, if you can, get a second pair of eyes on it. You know, if there's anyone that's open to mentorship in your community, doc is a great way to connect with mentors. So if there's someone who you can get to just give a read before you submit, give you some feedback. You know, you can hire script. If you have a little bit of budget, you can hire a script editor to look at it. So some people, like I used to do that as a producer. People would hire me to be their script editor on their documentary treatments before they'd submit to grants. Not people that I was working with as a producer, but just other filmmakers. So some producers will do that. And I think it's good to have that other pair of eyes sometimes.